Alright, so I just finished the 10x rule by Grant Cardone. And basically, what the 10x rule is going into any business, you have to assume that it's going to be 10 times harder than you expected, and it's going to take 10 times more effort, and you're going to want to dream and think and basically plan 10 times bigger. So if you're thinking you want to open like 1,000 square foot store, you should expect the work of a 10,000 square foot store, but now you're thinking 10 times that because you're dreaming of a 10,000 square foot store. You have to think 10 times bigger than that. So you have to put in the work of a 100,000 square foot store and open a 10,000 square foot store when you originally just wanted a 1,000 square foot store. So that's like a huge difference. Everything is pretty much accurate. That if you decide like to do something and it's your first time, it's going to be 10 times harder. I know, I've done it. And I also found, well, I don't know if this is true, but I would have liked to have done it 10 times bigger. This is something Donald Trump says in his books too, that it takes just as much work to do a $5 million project as a $500,000 project. You just get 10 times the reward. So he talks about all these different things that you have to do, gives a couple examples. Near the end of the book was my favorite part, where he tells, again, this was kind of in parallel with Trump's book, The Art of the Deal, where he talks about his actual day and like what he goes through and all the big events that happened, similar to Gary Vaynerchuk's videos where he does like a whole day of what he does. But this was Grant Cardone's about the last, I don't know, a couple chapters of the book. He talks about his actual day and what he did during one point in his life. So he had dreamed to basically be everywhere. Like he wants to be synonymous with sales and be everywhere. So that's like his big, big goal. So everything that he does, he wants to be driving towards that big, big goal. So that's basically how his whole team decides what they want to do. Like, will it help us to achieve this large goal? That's like the only question they ask. So to achieve his largest goal, he thinks that being on television would be like a huge, huge deal for him. And I believe, well, I'll go into that in a minute, but he basically talks about how he was writing to all these different television producers for years, and he would just never get any replies back. No good replies anyway. He was told like it was maybe like a 1 in 100 chance for every one show pitched. For every 100 shows pitched, one gets made into a show, something like that. But he wasn't discouraged. He was really, really confident in it. And he basically just kept asking. It wasn't working. And then one day, someone comes to him. He's like, I wanted to make a show on sales. A producer with a huge team from New York. He's like, I want to make a huge show on sales. And I think you'd be perfect. So Grant says, why didn't you come to me sooner? Because he's all cocky, like, I've been waiting for this my whole life, like, I'm so ready. So yeah, he basically talks about his experience with that, and then another show comes in and wants to use him, and all these different things. He talks to, forget her name, Joan Rivers, I think, when it was on one of her shows. He's like, hey Joan, do you have any suggestions? I want to make my own show. And he said, of course, he was nervous to do it because like she's super famous and he was like very unknown at the time. But he did it, and she gave him the number of some guys, and they were from, I believe, California. And then he started talking to them at the same time as the New York. He also talks about doing things first, like agreeing, committing, and then figuring it out later. So like for the one in New York, the show, he decided to call them. Once they called him, he was like, yeah, I'm your guy. And he then called like the head of that department before waiting for them to reply again. And he was like, I'm actually going to New York next week or whatever. So he's like, I'll meet you then. And in reality, he had no plans to go to New York, and he actually had stuff scheduled for that week, it turned out. Stuff that he wasn't supposed to be able to move. And he ended up moving it and getting everything worked out. He got to New York, the guy didn't want to see him, and then he figured out a way, and the guy saw him, and everything just worked out because he just like kept pushing and pushing, and eventually it ended with like stuff still in progress, I think. But seems like he does either have a chance or he's very close to getting his deal. So those were like the biggest lessons from that book.